horror stories from the ER. She gives really good talk. I hope everybody's here. Please spread the word. Anyone that you know is not here, please do attend. But today will be our last lecture, our second class request. Actually, the only one I got, if I remember correctly, was St. John's Wort. And I really think whoever suggested that, yeah, that's a very interesting one. Yeah, the other few are more, I don't know, general interest if you're, I don't know, paying attention to illicit drug use, at least in this society. So, I think that's it. Yeah, any questions or concerns before I just jump in and go through my last spiel for the term? Here we go. So, inhalants are a really big class, or a very overgeneralized class of drugs of abuse, and something that's really been on the decline. Their popularity was much bigger 20, 30 years ago than it is now. A lot of it has to do with the advances in synthetic chemistry, because there's a lot of drugs on the street now that can get you to the places you want without having to secure these types of things. But this is known by a number of names: inhalant abuse, volatile substance abuse, solvent, sniffing, huffing, bagging. I didn't hear that before looking this up. This must be a regional thing. But as the name implies, it is just inhaling certain substances that aren't necessarily good for you. This is a very common, if you have any experience with this class, this is a very common thing to see. People with paint or solvent all over their face, a very distant look and a smile on their face, or kind of the opposite, a very wicked one. And I don't mean to make light of anything, but at the same time, when researching these things, it's hard not to appreciate the comedic value of a man who huffs paint and then beats his mother with a spatula. Please don't do that. I don't give medical advice from the lectern, or at least I try not to, but don't beat mom. And don't beat anyone with a spatula. But there are a number of different classes of things that these can come from, and we'll get into the nitrites a little later. I brought these back because I brought them up, I guess, during hallucinogens, but really did a quick job of it, so I was going to explain a little more. However, when it comes to these types of inhalants, the majority of these substances revolve around toluene content. I'll get into that in just a second. But there are a number of different compounds that produce a high through inhalation of various things. So these nitrogenous compounds, again, nitrous oxide and amyl nitrite we talked about, but I'll give a slide to each of these in a bit. However, first off is toluene. Toluene is the main component for that does the pharmacological activity in spray paint, in regular paint, nail polish, model glue, or at least to be in model glue. They've changed that formulation because people were having too much fun on that. But the others, as we described before, whippets, so poppers for amyl nitrite, whippets, and just as a quick aside, I don't think I brought that up before when we talked about it, big distinction in formulation of nitrous oxide. There's an industrial side, and then there's a medicinal or food grade nitrous, and don't mix them up. Nitrous for your car has all kinds of crap in it, and a lot of people who have tried to use this as a source of whippet have ended up in the emergency room with all kinds of bad poisoning because it's not pure. Medical grade nitrous that you would get in a dentist chair is very pure and clean, and then there's kind of the food grade, if you will. I'm not sure if they even do this anymore, but was it whipping cream canisters used to be charged. I don't know if they still are, and that used to be, I don't know, I thought it was kind of amusing. You'd go into a supermarket on a Sunday morning in any head neighborhood, or especially a college neighborhood, and see all the tops of the whipping cream cans are all open and you can't get anything out of them because someone's in there huffing there's a little bit in there that you can get, and you shouldn't do it, but it is in there, or it was in there. I don't know if it's still in there, but anyways, yeah, big distinction between those two, and people should be aware. So, pharmacology with toluene, here's the molecule itself. So a little ring with a methyl sticking off it. As you can imagine, this will stick to everything. It'll get everywhere, it'll stick to everything. And because it's being primarily absorbed through nasal passages, through the mouth, it can get right into the brain in appreciable quantities. And this is this is probably the one that has a higher concentration than even alcohol. But as you see here, here's a little chart or a little figure showing the effects and concentration that's needed for it. So looking at toluene concentration in a molar scale, you can see at the millimolar, so 10 to the minus fifth to fourth, is where you could start to smell it, right? And then we're going to go all the way up to straight molar concentration, and this is the amount that you will get for the huffing activity. And this is going to be right from the source, right? Whether you're soaking a rag in it or you're going right into that gas can and breathing it in for whatever reason, that's the concentration that you'll be working at. But between these is where you can have a pharmacological effect, and it's either going to activate or help the activation of specific receptors. More likely it will inhibit. And as you can see, there's so many things here. So you're going to potentiate the activity of GABA A and serotonin receptors, studied plenty of that, and then inhibit all kinds of, here's a bunch of nicotinic, acetylcholines. We've got, who else is here? Sodium channels, inward rectifying potassium channels, calcium channel. Yeah, it's screwing everything up. So all kinds of inhibition in the brain, and this, though it can have an activity with, or activation of the reward circuitry, it's more that it just kind of freezes the brain, if you will. And what's further interesting, though, as you can see here, the no effect is in glutamate receptors. And that's fascinating, and I still have to wrap my head around that. But yeah, supposedly not so much activity with the glutamates, but everything else gets hit by it. So, dose-dependent type of drug, like everything is, but highest concentration of anything that we've looked at so far. On to nitrous oxide, again, primarily used clinically for a first round of anesthetic or to calm people down before an actual general anesthetic is applied. We have a certain understanding of the pharmacology based off of how this molecule works in our system, but it's really difficult to study. As you can see here, this is a small, highly charged molecule. So everything you put it to is going to react. So it makes it very difficult to actually do PK/PD or PK/PD studies on this because it's so highly reactive. So having good, clean, reproducible data is very difficult. However, it is thought to work not only through muscle relaxation, but disinhibition of GABA interneurons. Not necessarily through, so can be through glutamate receptor, but also through activity of the oxide molecule itself. And then that disinhibition, as we've seen before, can lead to increase of dopamine release and then subsequent turning on of the reward pathway. So, and then amyl nitrite, talked about this before, primarily smooth muscle relaxation and vasodilation, clinically used for treating chest pain, usually related with congestive heart failure, but yeah. Mechanism for it is seen here, just primarily through nitrates in general, and we don't need to go through all of the different modifications that happen can point to the end operation for this being a switch from, so our myosin light chain, right, the subunits in muscle fibers will primarily be involved in contraction in vascular smooth muscle, but due to the dephosphorylation of the myosin light chain, it will promote relaxation in these muscles. And that's its main mechanism of action. Supposed to be used for, again, treating heart conditions, but can be used for other areas of the body that you want to have engorged with blood. So, deliriants, I apologize for I'm all over the place with this lecture, even more so than usual, just due to the fact that it's a number of different things I wanted to talk about. Deliriants were the one that we didn't talk about when going over hallucinogens, and it's mainly because it's such a small subclass, and there was a lot of interest in it generations ago, with very little now, and it's primarily just due to what they do to you. So, talked about classic psychedelics before, so these are the fun hallucinogens that work through serotonin modulation. Then the dissociatives that work through glutamate or opioid receptors. But the deliriants themselves work through muscarinic acetylcholine receptors, and their primary effect is deliria, really. Confusion, loss of motor coordination, and the like. So these primarily, atropine and scopolamine have been around forever, and they're still the main agents in this class. And but you just don't hear much about them anymore. Antagonists at muscarinic acetylcholine receptors and can cause the onset of deliria, which apparently was a much more sought after state of mind generations ago, especially within artist community. Artists and writers enjoyed that change of mindset before creating their works. So, there you go. But again, here's a big reason. There just isn't a lot of attention paid to these. As this chart shows, the primary interest in hallucinogens is in the fun psychedelics, with a little bit of interest in dissociatives and very little in the deliriants. So again, scopolamine and atropine here are the main players in this space, with a lot of more recent additions, but not a lot of interest in those. And again, with delirium the deliriants have the overlap with dissociatives in terms of mocking schizophrenia, or some of the effects will mimic the effects of schizophrenia, okay? However, there is a big distinction between the deliriants in that it doesn't go as far as the dissociative drugs do, and it usually is not as dangerous. There seems to be an element of confrontation that happens with dissociatives, especially with PCP, because those seem to bring on kind of a God complex, if you will, where you're invincible, and people seem to want to, they take their euphoria to that level and want to challenge people around them so that they know that they are the God. But deliriants don't seem to do that. It's much more introspective type of effect. So big distinction there. Now, bath salts are a different one to define, because the term bath salts is used for a couple of different agents. It's used for a lot of different random garbage that gets put into street drugs as mixing or cutting agents. So just some substance X that grows your quantity of whatever you have. And that's not the bath salts that we'll be talking about, because there are distinct bath salts that come from the khat plant, the Catha eduli, shown here, and that is the intended drug. So khat is the source. The specific compounds are called cathinones. Specifically, synthetic cathinones are really big, but they are the specific drug that is referred to as bath salts. So that's something I really hope that the community, the research community or scientific community cleans up, because there is that overlap between referring to bath salts that can be any crappy cutting agent that you throw into a substance, or the specific derivatives of the khat plant. And that's the one that I'll focus on now, the cathinones, meth cathinones, as you can see here. And as is, very apparent, they look a lot like the amphetamine drugs, and their mechanism of action is very similar to that, where they will shut down transport of monoamine neurotransmitters. Primarily dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin are secondary, but it's mainly a dopamine modulator, like the other stimulants that we talked about. And I gotta apologize if, with some differences. I had one of the worst, I think they call it Mandela effect today. I had several slides in here, and then I went to finish and they were gone. And nobody wants to hear this, but I'm sorry, I'm gonna fill some time here. I had a bunch of slides for bath salts, and I remember giving them last year. I remember standing here and presenting them, and then when I went to look at everything today, they were gone. When I went to the initial deck that I downloaded, they weren't there. And I went to last year's D2L entry for this class, and the slides weren't there either. And I'm sure I downloaded, whatever. We won't get into the whole Fruit of the Loom thing that's going around, but yeah. Okay, let's get back to character here. Apologize. One of the biggest concerns with these synthetic cathinones is they aren't, their toxicity is more widespread than the other stimulants, right? We talked about amphetamine is primarily through cardiac toxicity, through norepinephrine modulation, but this can be systemic. Toxicity with synthetic cathinones can be systemic. And then on top of that, or what can compound that, is synthetic cathinones can also be used as one of the bath salt cutting agents I talked about. So as I said, there's a bunch of crap that's referred to, there's a bunch of substances that are referred to as bath salts that can be used for cutting agents and giving you larger volume of other substances. Then there's the synthetic cathones that come from the khat plant. Those synthetic cathones can also be co-abused, as shown here. So what we see is these are emergency room cases that are reported where synthetic cathones are on board, all right? So a very small percent is only using synthetic cathones. The majority, almost 90% of hospital room visits that have synthetic cathones on board also have some other drug of abuse on board, be it ethanol, amphetamine, cannabis, and the like, right? So, kind of a widespread application for this term, and a confusing sort of, due to the fact that it can be one of several different things when you say bath salts. But that's kind of the array of things that are covered under that term. And so, okay, lastly, St. John's wort. So this is a really interesting one because it's been used for hundreds of years as a herbal remedy. Modern pharmacologists have actually have shown, and there's a lot of interest in this plant actually, and in the compounds, to show a wide variety of things or clinical uses from the plant. So this is one of those that, it's been used in a lot of different traditional medicines for various uses, and then modern medical community has seen that there is actual pharmacological evidence that it does work. For the most part, it's used for neuroprotection, primarily in depression and being an antidepressant, trying to alleviate moods and help people sleep. But there is a number of studies that show it can work as an antibacterial and fungal and viral, has anti-tumor properties, anti-inflammatory, and then anti-nociceptive as well. So a lot of interest in this, and I guess I should have said that. Here's the plant itself, Hypericum perforatum, St. John's wort, right? Okay. So in terms of its work with depression, it works like other serotonergic modulators, right? It works through the ability to increase serotonin levels in synapses, okay? So similar to SSRIs, but it seems to have a more gentle effect, if you will. A lot of people have a lot of success on SSRIs, but there's a whole host of side effects and issues that people have with them. This is a more milder form, but it works through the same activity of increasing serotonergic tone in synapses. Also has been shown to work to prevent, as a treatment for Alzheimer's disease, if you will. So as it shows here, here's our normal acetylcholine flow, and this can actually work to block acetylcholinesterase activity, so you can get better acetylcholine signaling, as well as block butyrylcholinesterase. So we talked about that enzyme. That's the primary one that breaks down cocaine in our system, but that's not, its intended or evolutionary function. No one knew we were going to be sniffing cocaine whenever we evolved, but BCHE is usually used just for clipping esters on any substance in circulation. So, however, it also has, and this one, this is kind of a forefront of research with this, but there is potential for it to work in prevention of neurodegeneration by preventing formation of amyloid plaques, as an antioxidant, preventing neuroinflammation, preventing apoptosis in neural cells. That's a huge thing. But then as a monoamine oxidase inhibitor or a MAO inhibitor, so a number of different potential effects of this drug, and they are really still building the kind of evidence that it does work as it's stated to. And this is, okay, my apologies. This is the big reason why I'm really glad. I forget who brought, whoever requested this. If you're not here, please thank them for me. But one of the biggest issues with St. John's wort is toxicity due to drug-drug interactions. So I'm sure, I gotta imagine people have heard that there's a wide variety of drugs that you don't want to take with grapefruit juice. This is the exact same thing here. And it all has to do with the activity of cytochrome P450. It's broken down by a number of cytochrome P450s, and therefore can decrease or increase the activity of other drugs. And that's the biggest concern with this. And it's one of those, there's unfortunately still this thought in the naturopathic medicine world that herbal medicines don't have side effects because they're herbs. And that's a very dangerous assumption. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence to support that, but very dangerous. And that's the same thing here, or that's best demonstrated here with St. John's wort, because of the fact that it can cause a number of different outcomes with some really important, anticoagulants, digoxin, statins. You don't want to mess around with those. The proton pump inhibitor is not such a, if you got a bad tummy, it's not great, but not lethal. The other things, it can be lethal. So that's the big thing I wanted to say with St. John's wort. Has a lot of potential clinical effect. A lot of people swear by its antidepressive effects. However, you have to be very careful with taking this, because of the fact that you can have drug-drug interactions and you can have inhibition of certain cytochrome P450s that are going to be breaking down and working on other drugs that may be on board, and you can run into a lot of problems with that. So that's the big thing with St. John's wort. And okay, so if you could suffer through one more of my stories, we're going to get into this one. So I guess I've had, not that long, less than 20 years of working in addiction research, or from one aspect of it or not. But definitely found some things that surprised me, and this is absolutely one of those. So I think I talked about this before. I believe I showed you this. So we're talking about cocaine, we're talking about cocaine treatments, and I think I showed this structure. So this is the structure of the protein cocaine esterase, all right? So I worked on this protein for a number of years, proud we are of all of me, but one of the things I was doing with it is trying to extend the life of this drug in circulation, right? Wanted to use this as a treatment for cocaine overdose or for curbing cocaine addiction. And one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that it would last a long time in blood, because this is, I promise to stop talking about the protein after this, but it's an amazing protein because it chews up cocaine really rapidly. And if you are seizing, if you're overdosing on cocaine, you give this protein, you recover like that. I've seen animals that are seizing and near death, and then you administer it, and then in 5 minutes they're walking around the cage and they're fine. It's amazing. At the same time, if you put this drug in circulation and then you ingest cocaine, it chews up the cocaine so quickly it can't get into the brain in appreciable quantities that you feel anything from it. So that was what the really specific thing I was working on, is trying to extend the life of this protein in circulation so that it could be administered. If anybody was trying to beat their cocaine addiction, they could have this and it would chew up the cocaine. And then, if you use a drug, you don't get any effect of it, you'll quit using the drug, is the thought. So one of the ways I was trying to extend the in vivo half-life of this drug is through pegylation. We talked about pegylation before with Epogen, right? And that's just sticking these molecules of ethylene glycol or polyethylene glycol onto a protein, and it protects the protein in circulation. It increases its solubility, it protects it from enzyme degradation, blah, blah, blah. That's great. But in order to pegylate a protein, you need to BiPeg, okay? And chemically reactive pegs, at least back then, when I started working on it, there were only a couple of companies in this country that would sell polyethylene glycol. The company that I bought the peg from initially was called GenChem. It's a company in Dallas, Texas, a subsidiary of a Chinese chemical synthesizing plant that would make this peg, and we could buy it from them. So when I ran out in the lab the first time, I went online and did a Google search, as we do, for GenChem peg products, and the immediate thing that came up was this, and I was beside myself, but intrigued, because apparently GenChem is not just the name of a peg producing company, it's the name of a drug that is very, well, I don't want to say very popular, but it is widespread. However, it is absolutely horrible, because what GenChem is you collect human waste in a container and you just let it ferment for a few days, and then you actually huff the vapors from that miraculous, some people have made devices so they can do it in the toilet. Other people just use bottles like this and then put a balloon on it, and so I guess I'll get into that. This was, at the time, people thought this was a hoax, apparently, that people weren't actually doing this, or there was a bulletin put out by Sheriff's Department in, I thought that was Florida. Yeah, I guess Naples, Florida. And initially they thought it was a hoax, then they saw that they were actually people that were gathering this stuff and making this. And the way this works is it just produces all kinds of different gases that can produce euphoria, primarily through hydrogen sulfide. Provides AMPA inhibition, and then it will increase your monoamine tone in your brain. But you have to smell it, is the problem. And anyways, yeah, it was one of the most disgusting things I've ever researched before, and I was shocked, but I don't know. I figured I would share it here because we're talking drugs of abuse. And again, I've heard a lot of people that, you know, when they can't get their fix, they've learned about this, and this is the route that they've gone because they wanted to get some kind of buzz going. But anyways, that's Gen Chem, and oh, there we go. Okay, so it works through modulation of primarily the glutamate transporter or glutamate receptors, as other drugs we've seen before, but it's through the generation of those small molecule gases, and then you know, you can get, yeah. You also have to huff though ammonia and other things that are just wrong, and carbon monoxide and dioxide too. So, yeah, it causes people to go hypoxic. There's people that have died due to passing out with devices attached to their face, and I can't imagine, yeah, can't imagine what mom would think if they knew that someone had passed off going that way. So again, inhibition through specific molecules of glutamate receptors will cause the effects from this drug, and yeah, that's that. Thursday, Dr. Hughes is here. She's an ER doc in Sparrow. I think some people know her here, but yeah, she'll be here Thursday. Gives a great talk. Please be here. That's it from me. Thanks, everybody. And yeah, hope to see everybody Thursday. Thank you.